All right, wine drinking people, we're back. It is still Tuesday, May 4th, on to the fourth seminar of the Great Wine Seminar. And this is an extremely French event. And I've been on Bob and Arlette for the last couple of years. Let's get an American producer. Let's get an Italian producer. Well, no Italian producers, unfortunately, this year. But we do have an American producer. That's right. And for a late afternoon snack, we had the CEO, David Pearson of Opus One Winery, in to present the wines of Opus One for a comprehensive tasting of America, Napa Valley's premier wine, America's premier wine. Opus One has become a status symbol for fine wine all over the world today. This wine is sold in all the major markets, and it has a secondary market. It's sold on the Place de Bordeaux, the first wine from the United States to be put on the Place de Bordeaux. This is a wine that took the French 100 years to achieve the kind of success that they achieved in just 30 years. And it was really nice to hear all the positive comments from our French friends about this wine. They were very complimentary about most of the vintages of Opus One. And this is a story that took place in the 70s. Robert Mondavi first met the Baron de Philippe Rothschild in 1970, and the Baron de Philippe was in this country looking to possibly do a joint venture. He was getting up there in his years, and they didn't meet again until 1978. Obviously, the Paris tasting of 1976 may have put a little bug in his ear after two wines from Napa Valley came in first place, both white and red, in the white and red category, besting the great wines of Burgundy and Bordeaux. This tasting made people take serious note of California wines, and this could have been the thing that prompted these guys to get together in 1978. By 1979, they laid the groundwork and were ready to put out the first vintage, or put together the first vintage. And the first 5 or 6 vintages were made at Robert Mondavi Winery, as there was no Opus One winery. And what they did is they took their winemaker, and they took Tim Mondavi, the winemaker at Robert Mondavi Winery, and they put them in a room at the beginning of the day with a bunch of barrel samples, and they said, all right, you guys come up with a blend. Well, they labored through it all day. The first day they came out, they said, we can't do it. Okay, the second day they said, all right, guys, get back in that room. We're locking you in again. Let's create a blend, Franco-American joint venture. Do it. And by the end of the second day, they said, we think we have the very first Opus wine, and the 1979 Opus One was created. Okay, well, today they no longer have two winemakers. This was a great idea. It helped these guys brainstorm and create something that was unique and different, kind of French in style and American in culture. And today, as of 2004, when David Pearson took over, well, Constellation Brands took over Opus One Winery that year. Well, they took the majority share of the stocks, and they decided at that time, we're going to have one CEO and one winemaker. Michael Salacci, who had been at Opus One since 1991, took over. 2004 was the first vintage that he finished in entirety by himself, or it may have been 2005. Okay, the lineup today for Opus One. We started with the very first vintage in 1979. This was not a very highly regarded vintage in California. However, this wine again showed excellent, and it was a lot of people's favorite wine among the old wines. It had this lovely tobacco and cigar box spice to it. Still had some cassis, red berry fruit, cherry, some underbrush. A really nice, well-balanced wine. The 1980 also showed very well, maybe not quite as concentrated, but these old wines all showed elegance and finesse and balance and freshness, one of the things you need for a wine to age for a long time. We skipped forward then to the 1986 vintage. This wine had a little bit of that barnyardy, fresh plowed earth note to it that this wine is kind of well known for. It. This wine had been affected with Brettanomyces in many vintages, and they've done a lot to remove the Brett. Brett is a bacteria that grows in a winery and can cause wine to have this kind of a gamey. It gives it a medicinal kind of band-aid note when it's young, and then it takes on these animal kind of characters, which some of the French people like. They call it sauvage sometimes. But the 86 had a little bit of this, and this was outstanding. Really nice. This was the first year that Patrick Léon got involved. He's the winemaker at Chateau Mouton Rothschild that recently brought Mouton Rothschild into the limelight again in the 80s. 1991, a very distinct wine from Opus One, and one of the great vintages in Napa Valley. This was one of my favorite wines in the whole entire lineup, still holding together very nicely, fresh, elegant, and stylish. 1992, a very good vintage, maybe starting to dry out just a little bit on the finish. And then 1994, one of the blockbuster vintages of the 90s, also showed very well, and quite a bit of this animal, this Brett in this wine. 1994 1995 was the only bottle of corked wine that we had. And the only wine that we didn't have a corked wine from was the seminar before Armand Rousseau. Not one bottle of corked wine in all weekend long. Then 1995, very nice. 1996, also excellent. 97, maybe not as showy as it should have been for this vintage. A lot of people considered 97 one of the great vintages in the 90s. 1999, I thought was really nice, maybe a little bit tannic, still very well endowed. 2000, soft. This is the wine that the Wall Street Journal picked as their #1 wine in a blind tasting they did of Cabernets from Napa Valley at $100 or more. And I know why, because it was drinking very, very nice, and it still is. The 01, still quite youthful on the nose, and still pretty big. Still needs maybe a little time. Maybe this wine's starting to shut down a little bit. 2004, you really start to notice the change in the style of this wine. More alcohol, a little bit less of that animal, that character that really defined Opus One, that little bit of Brett that the wine had in certain years. And then 2005 and 2006, the young wines, still very young, still very oak-dominated, but still show that balance, finesse, and elegance that is Opus One. And that's all we have for you for the Opus Seminar. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your host, Andrew Lampasone, signing off, saying remember, always drink the good stuff first.